all of my clients, they've all indicated and actually verbally said it out loud that they don't want a note taker. They don't want a document pusher, but they want a true thought partner.
Welcome to the Smart Talk series, the show for professionals who want strategies, tips, and real talk about all things PR, marketing, and social media. Your host is Melissa Vela-Williamson, an award-winning, accredited, and nationally recognized PR pro and communication thought leader. And now your host, Melissa Vela-Williamson.
Hello and welcome to the Smart Talk series. I'm Melissa Vela-Williamson. This season, our focus is on passing the mic. Today, I'm joined by Moon Kim. A seasoned communications leader, Moon Kim is an executive vice president and corporate practice leader at M Booth, a mid-sized marketing communications agency headquartered in New York. In this role, she serves as a trusted counselor and thought partner to clients and leads a team of 35 plus practitioners at M Booth Corporate Practice. Welcome, Moon.
Thank you, Melissa. It's great to be here.
Well, we're honored to have you, and you sound like a very busy professional. So tell us more about your background and your work today.
Yes, I'm happy to. Well, I've been in the PR and communications industry since 2005, so I'm probably dating myself. It's all exclusively been on the agency side. And I've been really intentional about that because, of course, I could have gone to the client side, but I've really enjoyed the ride in the agency life. The big perks of being on the agency is you get to work with a different array of clients, brands, get to really understand different sectors. Probably the biggest perk is leading a dedicated team and just collaborating, working alongside really smart and creative colleagues. So that's why I've still been here on the agency side, and I don't have any plans to leave. As you mentioned, I'm at M Booth, been here for almost 14 years. And my work today, it's really just making sure I'm attracting and retaining the best and diverse talent, as well as helping to develop, coach, and create an inclusive place for them. So that means like taking barriers out of their way so they can thrive and be successful on the front lines and leading their account teams. So yes, I'm still very much client oriented, but these days I will say, and my priority is the team, because I know that if I have the best team and a happy team, then clients will actually naturally come. And that makes my job probably the more rewarding too, because at the end of the day, of course, outcomes are important, but to me, it's about relationships, deepening them, making new relationships. And I think that's the biggest reason why I'm still here in this industry and still thriving in the agency life.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important that you point out relationships, Moon, and that'll be the focus of our conversation, because in the book, I felt like it was a proud talk. And like, if you search the word relationships, I could do that. And that'd be fun to say, oh, I mentioned it 500 plus times, but I probably do because it's so important. There's a whole chapter on it just to help people focus in on what you need to make deep relationships. And that starts with your team, like you're saying.
Right.
It has to start with happy employees, do better work and attract better people, in my experience.
That's right.
Yeah, I think it's really important that you do that. And you're right. Agency life is definitely a ride. It's so diverse in terms of what you'll be working on. And hopefully, like you all are doing with intentionality, it should be diverse in terms of the types of people that work on that work and their thought process, their industry focus even. So I love that. And I love that you're working to actually retain this talent and be that barrier remover, because I think as we advance in our careers, it's really important.
Right. And these days, I feel like I'm much more into HR than PR because I'm really focused on the people and the teams and really being their life coach. I think that's where a lot of my energy goes. In this hybrid world too, being a leader, it's a lot more work, but I think because there's also greater rewards too. There isn't a playbook, we're kind of like writing it as we're doing it. So that makes you feel more empowered and obviously feel like a change agent, but also there are times when it can feel lonely and it can feel heavy. So I try to balance that out with not taking work so seriously. And I think the motto that I have is take it one day at a time, because of course you want to solve everything, but sometimes some problems actually solve itself. And then obviously just reminding yourself, one day at a time. You don't have to do everything all today. I think that helps minimize, at least for me, burnout.
I think that's really important you bring that up, especially in the PR industry. I've heard different phrases throughout my career, like, this isn't rocket science, or no one's going to die for lack of PR. And, there's different times, especially like the pandemic. We write some very critical things. Our messaging can influence lives. And so sometimes it does feel like that. So I think it's important you pointed out that, we're just people too, and it's one step at a time. So you're featured in the book as a Pass the Mic voice, and your chapter is number 5, which is titled The Relationships You Need to Be Successful. And in your Q&A, you remark on networking as important throughout our careers. So how does networking lead us to the relationships we need to build as PR pros?
Sure. I think networking, I know that word can sound daunting, but if you really unpack that word, right? It's about making meaningful connections, making work friends, making industry peers, and discovering how you can help. If you go into a relationship, how am I going to get something out of that? Is it a job? Is it a lead? Is it an opportunity? But if you treat it as, how can I learn and how can I help? How can I be of service? That can make it more approachable for you and also more rewarding. So for me, when I think about networking, I think about just learning about another person's world and how I could potentially help. And it may not be right away, but how could I perhaps make an introduction that could be helpful? So I treated it that way, of service. And in return, that can be rewarding. And also it doesn't feel like work to make a meaningful connection.
I think that's very true. And it can be much more natural, like you're saying, than networking sounds as a term. It's friend making, right? It's making the allies. It's making connections. I love all your points on that.
Exactly.
And I know as a professional, you're passionate about being a client counselor and a thought partner. So what's your point of view on that?
Well, these days, I think this was always the case. Clients always wanted this, but I think especially in the last 3 or 4 years, all of my clients, they've all indicated and actually verbally said it out loud that they don't want a note taker. They don't want a document pusher, but they want a true thought partner. So what does that thought partner mean? To me, that means being a reliable and trusted counselor. That means having a point of view, having an opinion, and conveying that clearly. And also having the trust and courage to push your clients to new spaces and places, and pushing their boundaries within reason, of course, and comfort zone. It's about seeing around corners and really bringing the outside in. Because if you think about the shoes of your client, they're always really busy managing their stakeholders, and they're really focusing and doubling down on their line of business, their line of sight, that they don't have the space or the time to go elsewhere, to explore elsewhere. That's where an agency thought partner comes in. It's our job to bring the outside in and also make it relevant to their world, and possibly offer connections, again, like relationships that can be meaningful to their work and job. So I can sort of give you a tangible example. Of course, everyone's talking about ChatGPT now, right? And when that was emerging, my team actually, the weekend it came online, they were already counseling clients about, hey, this could be something interesting for your world. This could be something at least for you to have a point of view on, especially if you're in the world of professional services, maybe to have a thought leadership differentiated point of view, or perhaps just toy around with it to start formulating one on OpenAI, or more generally, something broader like generative artificial intelligence. And I think something like that, we might have not been the experts at it. We might have also been toying around with it as a consumer, but we sort of had the courage to be like, hey, we don't know all of the answers, but you should poke around with it too. And as a result, our clients were really thankful that we saw around the corner, that we anticipated before they even knew that this could be something that they should have a point of view in. And so I try to really lead by example of when we say be a thought partner, I have to be that for my team to also push themselves to be a thought partner to their clients.
Yes, I am so aligned with all of that, Moon, because I think that's our number one job, particularly as we advance in our careers and have more experience and ways we can think about our world. I love the metaphor of really looking around that corner, because that is like, what is that trend? What does this mean? Does it mean anything to our industry? Sometimes it's just asking good questions about it starts establishing that point of view. And I know that I've been seeing a lot of chatter about it myself. In fact, our podcast producer, Jennifer, had said, have you seen this? Let's play with this. And it was a little alarming when we put in, like, right in Melissa's voice, some social media posts, and how it did kind of nail and grab from my content. But there's other ramifications that I was thinking about right away as a PR pro. And I'm actually going to do a talk on that with a copyright and media law lawyer, because how far can we push that boundary too? And so I love it that you all were on that and thinking about that. And I will say for our listeners that sometimes when you are that thought partner, they don't always appreciate that, right? It's that
Right.
you know, the client will want the advice and counsel, and they want those good big ideas, but because of their managing day-to-day stakeholder issues and putting out their own fires, you may get some feedback that doesn't always feel positive, but it
Right.
doesn't mean you're not doing the right thing, right, Moon?
Right. That's right. And sometimes it's also knowing your client, because some clients, they want something that's fully baked. They're not going to appreciate a half baked, right? In ChatGPT, we're all kind of learning as a whole, right? As individuals, as consumers, as PR professionals, like, how will this impact our life? And so just taking that as an example, there are some clients I know that I can't serve that up unless I have something distinct that I want to say, or that what they should actually do with that. So it's also knowing your audience and how to serve that up so that it's palatable. Because if you're just doing it just to check the box of like, oh, this is a trend and I'm just going to put it out there, that thought bubble out there, that could also be even annoying for some clients who want something a little more polished that they can then take to their stakeholders. So yes, bottom line is really understand your clients and how they want the information served up to them.
Exactly. You definitely have to tailor per client and situation even, because yeah, I'm one of those, like, I will pop that bubble quick, because I'll say, look, I'm not an early adopter, because I'm all about that substance and I want to see the ramifications and have that vetted a little bit. I'm more of that mid adopter, right? I want some kinks to be worked out before I spend time on it, or even suggest it to someone else. So I love that you're taking that approach. And that's a really good tip, because one thing I wanted to ask you is, like, are there some common mistakes you see agencies make when they work with clients as advisors?
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, agency, we're in the client service business. Generally, that means we want to satisfy clients. We want to also delight them. But I think the common mistake agencies can make is when we forget that we're also in the business of advisory. And that means sometimes telling them no. That also means telling them, yes, but have you thought of it this way? Giving a pivot versus just saying yes to them, being an order taker in an effort to please your clients. Because at the end of the day, they might initially like that you're agreeing with them, but also they're not paying you just to execute, just to take orders. They're also paying you for your advice, your counsel. So I think that's probably one of the common mistakes. I've also seen when agencies do things that they've always been done, right? Like, it might have worked in the past, but we also know that the environment changes so quickly. So what worked in the past may not work today or in the future. So I always say, like, don't rest on your laurels. Don't rest on your past successes. Continue to poke holes at your own success. So I call this like continuous improvement, right? So even with clients, just because you've had long-standing relationship and you know that this works because it worked 10 years ago, it worked, 5 years ago. Well, it's probably a good thing to re-examine, does it work today? So having that sort of critical eye really can help stand apart and also help you avoid some of the common pitfalls that agencies make when working and trying to satisfy clients.
I think a lot of what you said there is really important, because things change constantly. The evolution of our industry has changed so much. And I saw someone remark on this the other day, like, they felt like there's been more changes in the last 5 years than the prior 20 when they worked in the industry. And I can't say they're wrong, because so much has changed. And I think that there's good with that, but that constant iteration and evaluation has to go hand in hand, whether you're in-house or external at the agency level. I think that's super important, Moon, like you said, and really know your role as an advisor isn't that yes person. That is not what we're to do. That doesn't always make us a fan favorite, particularly if you're an employee. I've been there, but you're singing my song in terms of what makes a good counselor and advisor. So I love that. So let's talk about what the best kind of agency and client relationships look like. What does that ideal relationship look like when you have it?
Well, a wise client, one of my best clients, actually told me an agency is just as good as the client. So in other words, it takes work, time, investment to be a good client to an agency. But when a client takes the time, takes the energy, takes that investment to bring the agency into their world, give them a pulse of what's happening in the organization, give them really like the truth, what stakeholders are saying, that's when an agency can rise to the occasion. And to be a great agency partner, that means treat yourself as a strategic partner, not a vendor. And that means anticipate what your client may need before they ask, or better yet, before they even know. That also means be an extension of the client team, which generally is a lean team. So when you are really that extension and you're doing more than what you said you will do, that does go a long way. And speaking of that, be flexible and play the long game. Because relationships, you don't want them to be transactional. A great client agency relationship, it's actually not transactional at all. And so that starts with playing that long game, invest in the relationship. And don't think of it as like, oh, well, I overservice and now I can't be around on that call. Actually double down. And sometimes when your client needs you, be more than available, and also give more time, because then it will pay in the long run. Also, I would say, I think we talked about this before too, like bring that out of box smart thinking, not once a year during a planning period, but throughout the year. That shows greater value because it's expected of you to do that during a planning period. And then I think this is also, one of my favorite is don't just be an ideas partner. Yeah, it's easy sometimes to be creative, to throw ideas out there, but be even better and sharper at the execution. That goes a long way when you throw in a creative idea and you know how to execute that.
I think that's so important. In this work, you have to have those big ideas, but you have to be able to execute that plan. Otherwise, it's worth nothing. All the investment of ideas put in that beautiful document has no value if it's not brought to life.
Exactly.
Yeah, you have to be good at both sides. And
totally.
And I definitely see that too, where you have people who are just throwing out ideas and they feel like that's all the work. So that can be overwhelming. And a lot of times with these leaner in-house teams, it's not super helpful. So I think assessing with the client, or if you're the client, I know your client is very wise, because absolutely, a great partnership means you're collaborating and both team members and team types are working together almost in tandem.
Totally.
And I have a client, you made me laugh. I had a client that said, and we'll tell everybody, we love Melissa and we love her team, but we thought when we hired them, that meant that like, oh, you're going to take all this PR work off our plate. We don't have to worry about that. And if anything, they just give us a lot more in-house work to do. And what they meant by that was these ideas take in-house support too. Operationally, there may be changes that need to be made. And that's where you have those real talk conversations of saying, I know you want more brand awareness, but when people are aware of you and they sign up online, they never hear back.
Right.
So sometimes it's actually having those honest conversations, but saying, okay, we have this great strategy and the tactics need to happen this way, but that's going to take your accounting team doing this and your marketer to do this. And so it has to be, we're working together. And like you said, the client has to understand if this is going to work well and really be worth your time and your funds, then that means that you're going to have to put some effort into it.
That's true. And sometimes clients go in, well, I hired an agency. I thought they're going to make my life easier. Why is it making it harder? I think that's the wrong way to look at it, because if you look at it from that point, you're looking at it from the short term, right? Mm-hmm. The long term is, yeah, some days there might be more work as a client, but later on, if you look at that, like now the agency is more immersed in your organization, so that when we're pitching that big idea, we know exactly, okay, you're right. You need to get your legal team on board. You also need to talk to your marketing colleague. Like these are steps that agency can start to know, to advise, and to also think through the actual execution piece of it, because anyone can have a brilliant idea. It's really about the execution. An agency needs to be immersed in the client organization to also know what are the limits of that idea.
Yeah, being realistic about it. I love that. So that kind of brings me back to my other thought, as you had talked about pushing the boundaries, but can you tell us about a time, because we're certainly not yes people, are there times you've had to push back or push the boundaries for a client's benefit?
Yeah. Now in my sort of tenure, right, as a senior and seasoned leader, it's expected. And that makes it easier for someone like me to push back or push the boundaries for a client's benefit. I think it's actually way more challenging to push back or push the boundaries for a client's benefit as a rising professional, someone sort of starting out or mid-career. So I learned that lesson actually the hard way when I was like 2 years into my career. I was an account executive. I was not at M Booth at the time, but I was so grateful actually I learned this lesson because it stayed with me and it helped me be the leader that I am to my team. Because if I'm telling my team to be a thought partner, I have to be one too. So what happened was, as an account executive, my job at the time was to land the stories and placement for clients. And I really loved that part of the job. But there was that one moment when I was charged to place a really timely think piece, an op-ed. And it was actually about subprime mortgages. So this was before the recession. So you can imagine, not only was this timely, but also at the time pretty provocative. And my client stakeholders, who were the authors of the piece, they wanted it placed now, and they wanted it placed in this specific leading outlet. So that was, of course, their top goal, and that was now my job, right? But at the time, this outlet was taking a little longer to review and provide a definitive answer of like, yes, we're going to run with this. Here's the publishing date. So my client was getting nervous, asking us, oh my God, we should be going to other outlets as a backup. I have these authors, these stakeholders that really want this placed today, but they actually wanted it placed at this top outlet, not a secondary outlet. And so it's understanding that goal, right? So my counsel at the time to my boss, who actually led that client relationship, was we need to push back. This is actually for their benefit. We need to tell this antsy client that we need to wait. The best thing we can do is to wait and to hear back from this top outlet who was the top choice, and they weren't coming back to us just yet. But unfortunately, my boss was equally antsy at the time as the client. And instead of pushing back, my boss at the time relented and told me, no, we need a pitch to our backup outlets. So of course, this is how it happened, of course, we now had two outlets, the top outlet and the backup, both interested in running with this exclusive think piece. Of course, that could be good news, right? Yes, we finally made the client stakeholders happy. But it wasn't good news because it actually put the agency in an uncomfortable position of having to tell this backup outlet that we're now pulling the piece. So not surprisingly, given the timely and provocative nature of this op-ed, the backup outlet editor, she was very upset. She actually yelled at me and told me effectively, don't ever pitch me again. And I'm taking a note of the client's brand. So just as I feared, and this was the counsel that I gave to my boss that never made it to the client, that we were risking a meaningful relationship, right? Because in our business, it's all about the relationship, not just for the agency, but also for the client. So to make this long story short, I'll come to the end, really, which was my boss actually ended up writing an apology letter to the editor who was very upset. And get this, she blamed it on an eager account executive for having not followed the right protocol.
I knew it.
Right? So we could have salvaged the media relation. We could have actually even avoided this situation had it that we were courageous enough to actually give the counsel that was not just right for us, but right for the client. So this lesson taught me two important lessons here, that I will never put myself or my team in that position of not pushing back to the client, because we our counselors day one, right? And this actually happened to be advice that would have benefited them. And then secondly, more importantly, I will never throw a member of my team under the bus for a mistake that should have been avoided in the first place if we had actually counseled them. Of course, I didn't stay long at that agency after that incident because it really told me that this is not a place where you have each other's backs or even the client's backs, that we were order takers here. And it can get you in these sticky situations of, risking a talent or media outlet or sometimes even the client.
That's a great story. It's really important to make sure that you do share that with newer pros because it absolutely happens. And I've had something similar kind of happen to me. And I knew pretty quickly, every time this leader's caught for overemphasizing something, to say that in a nice PR way, she's going to use or he's going to use or they're going to use. I'm going to make sure I don't burn any bridges here too, Moon. They're going to use one of us to cover that track. And I didn't want to be aligned with it. And I think it's really important. And that's why I'm really strategic. And it sounds like you absolutely are about really coaching newer pros and younger pros about, look, you've got to manage your personal brand. Even if you're an in-house employee at an agency, the coolest agency ever.
Right.
Or a big corporation, you sometimes can, make that change and try to push back internally and say, I think we should go this way. And it should not matter how young you are in your career or anything else or where you are on this ladder, right?
Right.
But there are times where that's not appreciated and looked over. And in fact, you'll get some blowback for that. And that's when sometimes you've got to make a change for your own good and the longevity of your career.
Right. And I'm glad I found out early that they weren't going to have my back because why am I putting out all this energy for, right? If they're not going to have my back at the end of the day. And so when my team has the courage to actually push back to me, I actually noticed that even more. I'm like, because I know that wasn't easy to do that. It probably was easier to be like, oh, yes, Moon, that's a great idea and follow through what I just said. Sometimes I'm also not perfect, right? I totally recognize that. And when someone under me or even a few levels under me has the courage to tell me something, I really listen and I actually respect that person more because I know how much courage that took and practice that took to do that. And for us to demand that of our team to push back on clients, they also have to learn how to push back on us. And we got to listen to that too.
Yeah, that's really, really important because as you were talking about, it's so important for these healthy client and agency or even internal collaborative teams to work together well. There's got to be that trust, and you can't have that trust if you're not having an openness to getting some kind of feedback that may not feel good in the short term, but long term is going to benefit you. So I think that's really important. And building trust is one thing, but then maintaining trust is so important to have that leverage to really guide your clients or even your team. So how do you lead your team to build that kind of trust?
Yeah, I mean, we all know, right? Trust is earned and it can be destroyed so quickly. But earning it takes a lot of effort. But you do it by just simply doing the things that you said you will do. You earn trust, not by words, by action. If you said you're going to do it, right? It seems like these are like the seemingly small stuff, like the daily stuff, like keeping to a timeline or actually responding or closing the loop with someone in a timely fashion. That kind of stuff actually matters a lot. And it might seem like really it's the small stuff, but really is the small stuff that it becomes the big stuff because it tells people, it signals to people and your clients and your team that if you are not doing any of the small things, the simple things, then how can you do the bigger things? How can they count on you to follow through on the bigger moments? So it's really remembering that trust is earned by just the day-to-day actions. And you can destroy it very quickly by not following through on that.
I think that's absolutely true. It's all about getting all the small things right so that you do seem trustworthy. I find that absolutely super important. And I think sometimes people who work with me are like, why does she care so much about this or that? Or that's not a big deal. And okay, we put that word in and we had told the client we wouldn't, but what does that matter? You caught it anyway. Whatever the example is, Moon.
Right.
I'm like, I won't always have time to look at every document.
Right.
So you've got to think with that kind of meticulous nature that it's the small things that when they can trust you, that you remember the minutia, that they know when you have that big idea or the big campaign that they're not sure about, but they're taking your advice as a thought leader, that no, they'll pull it off because they are so attentive to detail. They're going to remember everything. They say they're going to email me back at this date and time. They absolutely will. It matters for our clients and it matters for the journalists a lot too. Absolutely does. And so I think that's really valuable that you train your team and kind of share that perspective. So I've enjoyed talking with you and I know you have a lot to get back to. So I just want to thank you. And then I want to ask you one of the questions that I find very intriguing to ask all my guests. What does smart talk mean to you?
Ooh, that's a great question. To me, smart talk really actually is about active listening. It's so easy to talk, right? It's so easy to even to talk over someone, but it's actually harder to really listen and understand what the other person, whether that's a client or a team member, colleague, your partner in life is trying to convey, and to hear that person out first before you say anything else. Because sometimes smart talk can just be listening and not saying anything, right? Because a lot of times I've learned that like people want advice, but most times they just want to be heard.
That's so true. I've definitely stepped into some mind holes where I was so excited to give advice and, oh, you asked me a question. Let me tell you everything you need to do now. And I realized, no, they needed less consulting and more coaching.
Right.
And for me to just ask open questions so that they were able to walk through their own answers. And so I love that you point out active listening as really being what's the smartest approach to having good conversation. So Moon, I've really enjoyed my time speaking with you, and I'm sure that there's some other wise clients that might want to connect. So what's the best way for our listeners to connect with you?
Well, email me at moonk@mbooth.com, or you can always find me on LinkedIn and connect with me there.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Moon, for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Of course. Thank you so much, Melissa, for having me.
Thanks to our listeners for joining me for today's episode. We love diving deep into communication topics to elevate our industry practice. If you'd like to go deeper, you can work with me as a trainer, consultant, or hire my firm for strategic communication planning or PR strategy services. And in case you missed it, Smart Talk, Public Relations Essentials All Pros Should Know is out. You can buy your copy to get my advice, tips, and tools about all things public relations. Available on Amazon, or get your autographed copy at mvw360.com/book. If you've already got your copy, please leave us a review on Amazon. It would mean the world to us and helps more aspiring pros find the book. And as always, think smart and communicate smart. And I'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Smart Talk series. If you learned something or enjoyed our conversation, share it on social media or send to a friend. To learn more about this and other communication topics, visit mvw360.com. That's mvw360.com.